through the years, I've interviewed, dozens and dozens of people who claim to have seen these flying pterosaurs, which again, these things were supposed to have gone extinct 64 million years ago. That's the last evidence we found of them in the fossil history.
Hey guys, Daniel here, and we are at the first annual Bayou City Paranormal Symposium. I'm honored to be here with my good friend Ken Gerhard. Ken,
good to see you, Daniel. Always.
Yeah, and so there's all kinds of great different topics here. People talking on paranormal subjects, and we have Nick Redfern as well talking about some of the Men in Black. And it's really great honor to be able to have you talking on cryptozoology and different strange creature sightings and different things that we might encounter out there. And so, Ken, tell us a little bit about what cryptozoology is in general.
Well, cryptozoology is the study of hidden animals. And a lot of people say, oh, what hidden animals? What do you mean? Where are they? Well, hidden animals actually implies that there are species out there that we haven't discovered yet. And as crazy as that may sound to a lot of people, there are like 15,000 new animal species that are described every year. Most of them are pretty small, but there's some big ones that pop up here and there. The point is the process of discovery is ongoing, and there are places on the planet still, wilderness areas where these things might be hiding, or maybe they're just small populations, very rare animals. So that's the premise, and of course in the field of cryptozoology, people are aware of a lot of what I call the rock stars, which are like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Jersey Devil Mothman, those types of things. But there are a whole wealth of mystery animals that I investigate.
Sure. That's something I think a lot of people probably know someone, or maybe even have an encounter themselves. They know someone who's experienced something strange, had a weird encounter out either in the wild, or seen something driving or going in camping. And so it's one of those things that a lot of people have a hard time believing unless they actually see it. And it can be a life-changing event for some people. It's really interesting, though, because when we have some of these creatures being discovered, it seems like it changes our scope and our understanding of zoology, of biology, genetics, and all of these things. So when it comes to going out and exploring some of these different parts of the wild that, as you say, there could be creatures that have been there the whole time that we just haven't seen, we haven't discovered yet.
Absolutely.
What has been your experience like getting out in the field? I know you've been at it for years now. What are some of your early experiences getting involved with searching for some of these mystery creatures?
Well, it's been a lifelong passion of mine. I've been investigating these topics for about 40 years now, over 40 years. Started when I was a small boy. And I've been very fortunate. I've traveled around the world to 26 different countries on 6 continents. Some really amazing habitats, the Amazon jungle, the jungles of Central America, the Australian outback, so on and so forth, all over North America, Alaska, and places like that. I really, as a young person, my family vacationed to Loch Ness when I was 15, so that's when I attempted my first field research. I had a little 8mm. Back then we used something called film, and so I had this little 8mm film camera that I carried around the loch, and I interviewed people that, the locals, about their experiences. It wasn't, it was always a kind of a hobby and an interest, but nothing I really was going to pursue full time. And then years ago, I met a group of researchers here in Texas that go out and investigate Bigfoot, mostly in East Texas, like the Big Thicket and some of those areas. And I started going out with them and experiencing things that I couldn't explain. I didn't see one, but I, heard things, and I saw footprints and things like that. So that's kind of when I went all in. And another funny kind of side story is, at the time I was in a band and we were touring around the country playing gigs, and I was one of the main drivers of the van, so a lot of times I would plot out locations where there had been sightings of cryptids. Those are unknown creatures, whether the Beast of Bray Road or the Loveland Frog or all these things.
Oh, sure.
And if we had a few extra minutes on tour, I would make a diversion and park the van in this particular location and go out and just kind of look around and stuff. So that's pretty much it. But I got a lucky break back in. First, I wrote a book called Big Bird in 2007, and that that kind of catapulted me into some opportunities. But in 2000, and around that same time, about 2006, 2007, I was discovered by a producer for the Travel Channel, and they put me on a TV show called Legend Hunters, and that was a very lucky break. And since that time, I've been very fortunate because once you're on television, and as long as you don't totally blow it, people will keep calling you and saying you want to do this show and that show, and so that's been a kind of a very fortunate situation because I've had a lot of opportunities to travel and do investigations, and other people have paid for it, which is always kind of a cool thing.
Sure. Yeah, so, you touched upon some really great stuff. So one thing is, Bigfoot seems to be one of the big sort of, you could say the poster boy, the icon for cryptozoology.
Sure.
It's the most like romanticized of the cryptids, as you said, and it's one that I think is probably well worth looking into. Of course, there are so many others, and you've done a lot of work on looking into some of these different sightings here, not just in Texas, but in many places.
All over, yeah.
So while that's something we could spend all day on, and I think it's a fascinating subject, the study of Sasquatch and of these relic hominids that could be still out there in the wild. And that's a really great area that we can all go into and see all these things. But we're going to kind of take another turn here. One thing you mentioned I think is interesting is, on your tours, going out and driving, you have all these different locations that you kind of stop on the way. And it's kind of one of the things I found that it's some of these places are so far out of the way that unless you make a specific, set the intention to go there just as that destination, it's so far out of the way that it's just more convenient sometimes to stop when you're in the area to some of these places. So it's great that you've been able to go and see a lot of these things that are way out, in the middle of nowhere in some occasions, but it's always good to be able to kind of work it into something that happens to be nearby, whatever else you're doing, unless you can dedicate your time solely to just go all the way out there just for the field research. And in speaking of, you mentioned your first book, your really awesome Big Bird, and this kind of tells about some of the flying cryptids and some of the things that we hear about in some native traditions, and even some modern sightings of things which seem to be out of prehistory, and even like if prehistoric creatures might still exist. And so this is kind of a really interesting concept, and I think that this is a really good topic to really touch upon because people are seeing these things out there and they might not really understand fully what they're seeing, but they know that it doesn't fit in with what we conventionally find acceptable within these regions. So tell us about the work that went into making this book, Big Bird, and all the different kind of cases that you came across to say, hey, you know what, there's enough out there to really put a work together on this.
Well, when I decided to write my first book, I was kind of looking for subject matter, and being in Texas, any researcher, I think you always want to play the home field advantage. That is, if there's something in your neck of the woods, become an expert on that, because logistically it's going to be a lot easier for you to go out to these locations repeatedly and kind of, gather information. Now, Big Bird, and I know it's a funny name, it is based on the Sesame Street character, but it was a newspaper invention.
Yeah.
A newspaper reporter thought it would be cute to call this thing the Big Bird. Coincidentally, a lot of our famous cryptids, Bigfoot is a newspaper invention, Mothman is a newspaper invention, Abominable Snowman, all of those were created by reporters, basically, and they stuck. But in terms of Big Bird, I knew of the stories and the reports. They dated back to 1976, and most of them emanated from the far southern part of Texas, the area around Brownsville, very close to the border with Mexico. And for example, there are a number of these are like newspaper clippings from that time period. Oh, don't worry about that. From that time period, there were a lot of newspaper clippings because people, beginning in January of 1976, people began to report these sightings of a giant flying creature down in the Rio Grande Valley. And over the course of just a few weeks, there were dozens of sightings in the Rio Grande Valley of something that was big, and they originally called it Taquache, which basically means like a flying possum, and other names, but Big Bird kind of stuck. And so I was aware of these sightings. They'd been written about, years ago in the 70s, but I figured I'd go down and do my own information gathering. So I went down to the valley, and I actually met an original Big Bird eyewitness researcher named Guadalupe Cantu, and that opened a lot of doors because he, took me to places where this thing had been seen. One famous sighting, let's see if I have this James Thompson sighting. I thought it was in here. But anyways, one famous sighting that went back to, oh, here he is. This guy named James Thompson, who was an ambulance driver, was driving down a road there one day, and he claims he saw this thing that looked like a pterodactyl. Flew in front of his, he called it a strange bird, but he drew a picture of it, and basically he said, that it looked kind of like this, and it was kind of a bat-winged creature with a reptilian look. And the thing that he really noticed was it had this really long tail with a little diamond or flange shape on the end. Can you see that little shape on the end?
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's incredible.
That is indicative of a very specific type of pterosaur. A pterosaur is a flying reptile from the Cretaceous. Oh, actually, the rhamphorhynchoids came from the Triassic to the Jurassic, getting technical here. But they all had this long tail with this little flange shape. The later pterodactyls, the bigger ones, didn't have that. They lost the tail. But he described that very specifically. Well then, around this same time period when I was writing this, I just happened to meet a guy in Houston, Texas, and I don't know if you can see this picture, but he basically described exactly the same thing from 1983, which is the same year James Thompson had his sighting. And to my knowledge, this guy had never heard of Big Bird, or, I interviewed him extensively, and like a lot of witnesses, he wasn't even really interested in any of this stuff. He was just a guy, an electrician that had this sighting. So that kind of, again, opened a lot of doors because I realized, okay, multiple people have seen this thing. So anyways, those are the basic stories. January, February of 1976. One of the most famous sightings, or one of the last sightings, occurred in February of 1976. 3 school teachers in San Antonio, Texas, all saw this flying pterosaur type creature, and that made the newspapers, obviously. So I went back and revisited those cases, and as always happens in cryptozoology, you write about the old cases, but then new cases begin to surface, new people begin to come forward. So that was it, just a lot of digging, and at that time I also appeared on some TV shows, mainly like newscasts and stuff, local newscasts about what I was doing and writing this book. And then other people saw those newscasts and called me and said, hey, I've seen that too, or I saw that too. And so, it's just one of those things. It's just kind of like a snowball. It just keeps growing and building momentum as it rolls.
Yeah.
And through the years, I've interviewed, dozens and dozens of people who claim to have seen these flying pterosaurs, which again, these things were supposed to have gone extinct 64 million years ago. That's the last evidence we found of them in the fossil history. So, interestingly enough, the largest pterosaur ever found was found here in Texas, actually in West Texas, in Big Bend National Park. In the 1970s, a paleontologist that was digging out there, I think his name was Kenneth Lawson, found this thing called Quetzalcoatlus. And it was a pterosaur that had a 40-foot wingspan. So it's probably the largest living flying thing ever on the face of the planet. So don't have any sightings of anything with a 40-foot wingspan in my book. I think that would be a little bit more noticeable, but it's kind of an interesting coincidence there.
Yeah. So, when it comes to these sightings and the possibility that there could be this prehistoric species that's still out there,
yep.
A lot of different thoughts come to mind. Some people might say, well, are we really dealing with a flesh and blood creature, or maybe is there some kind of time warp where you're having things from the past appear, and there's all these different kind of interesting ideas. What is your take on that?
Well, I'm an open-minded person, so I always like to preface things with anything is possible. I truly think that anything is possible. There's so much that we don't know about the workings of our world, our universe, and so on and so forth. But people have proposed to me, well, are these ghosts or time travelers, from past eras? And my answer to that is, you had millions of species in the past, and none of those are being recorded in modern times. No one says I saw a woolly rhinoceros or a brontosaurus. You know, it's always very specific things. A pterosaur, or some people claim they saw like Bigfoot, which might be a relic hominid or something. So, you know, to me, it's like that doesn't really jive, because it seems like you're just seeing a lot of other animals from the past too. If that were the
more
case.
conventionally accepted things. I think that's an interesting idea, that, you know, it could be possible that there is a, you know, some kind of whether it's a real object or it just seems to be a sort of repeating thing, that could be a really big stretch as far as if that's actually happening. But just the idea that we are seeing something out there could mean a lot. And so,
if I could just make one more point to your thing. So, there's a lot of talk about, mind projections. That's something we talk about. You want to get into the metaphysical side.
Sure.
Thought projections. Do we create these creatures, from the power of our belief systems and stuff? Isn't it interesting that the big bird, the first sighting started right after the discovery of Quetzalcoatlus in West Texas, which was it's almost like the seed was planted. People were reading the newspaper that this giant pterodactyl had been found, the fossils had been found in Texas, and then I think literally the next year is when the sightings of big birds started. So, it's something.
It's really interesting to see that, sometimes people who aren't very familiar with just wildlife in general, they might see something that they don't even know what it is anyway. And let's say, some of the conventional thought might be, well, they're seeing a stork or a crane or something that's like
some people are
more commonly accepted.
You can explain. I think you can explain some of the sightings with misidentifications and imagination.
So that's a good point. When it comes to the study of cryptozoology, we have to consider, are some of these sightings just misidentifications of regular known species? And when you have clear things like the spade or the shape on the end of the tail here, which, like you said, is clear indication of a very particular species. This could mean that, not only is it not a crane whatsoever, but that there could be many of these somewhere in a remote area. And do you find that maybe there are environments that could hold populations of these creatures?
My only theory regarding that is if you travel right across the border of Texas into Mexico, you have the Sierra Madre Mountains. I've done research in the Sierra Madre Mountains, and it is a vast, uninhabited, remote mountain range. So, I guess theoretically, if you wanted to say that these things were anywhere living and breeding, it would be somewhere like that. And in fact, I've gotten information that sightings of these do extend down into Mexico, and also you can go and look at certain Aztec and Maya ruins in Mexico. For example, the ruins of Teotihuacan. I haven't been there yet, but I've been told that there are things in these ancient stone carvings at those ruins that look like pterosaurs. So,
I think it's a really interesting thought. Yeah, just to consider the possibility that some of these creatures, which we're told are from the ancient past, could still be around and living today.
It's possible.
And if that is the case, it changes our understanding of what's out there biologically and how nature thrives in a way that is completely different than we understand. So I think it could tell us a lot, and there are a lot of really interesting sightings of all of these different creatures. So while there are a lot of people who, let's say, they study Bigfoot and they're just into Bigfoot, and that's fantastic in itself. But you have to see that there are many of these mystery creatures out there that are just still yet to be discovered. So I in my view, I think it's a matter of sometimes we won't know if we don't go. And so I think you're doing a great job of traveling. You're getting out there into the field. You're really seeing what some of these people have no idea about that others, could only imagine, in the wildest possibilities, that there are these things out there. And so for us to be able to know more, we've got to have boots on the ground and have you do this work that you're doing. So where can people go to find out more about what you have going on?
Well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate your kind words. I have a website, kengerhard.com. I have a Facebook fan page, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. People can also reach me there. If anyone's had a sighting or an experience, or if they have a question or a comment, I love to interact with people. So I would love to hear from anyone out there that may have had an experience, or may have a theory, or just some insight that they'd like to share.
Yeah, so there are some very strange things out there. Sometimes people never tell their story to anyone because they don't know how to do that. And so with these resources available for everyone, it's a great opportunity for people to come out of the woodwork and say, you know what, I did experience, or I know someone, or family or friend. So I think that it's fantastic work you're doing. Really appreciate the time. You're here to share everyone all this great stuff. So appreciate you taking the time.
Always appreciate you, Daniel.
We'll stay in touch and see what you have coming down the line.
Sounds good.
All right. If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites.
Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond. So let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.